Welcome to the Next Generation Dog Podcast, hosted by Melinda Benbow of Urban Uplander Pet Care and Bethany Carter of Sanguine Moon Kennels. Join Melinda and Bethany as they discuss dog breeds, sports, training, health, and much more with special guests. Tune in weekly for all things dedicated to dogs.
Welcome back to another episode of the Next Generation Dog Podcast. My name is Melinda Benbow, here with my co-host Bethany again, and we have last week's guest rejoining us, Kat with Standing Stone Kennels. Kat, thanks so much for joining in again.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
I know Bethany and I had a wonderful time chatting with you in our last episode. And for anyone who hasn't listened, go back and check it out. It's all about the NAVHDA testing system, what it is, what the NA test is, and how to kind of get yourself ready to participate in that. One of those phases is the tracking portion. And so this episode is going to dive a little bit further into it. Selfishly, Bethany and I really want to make sure we're prepared for our first, well, not our first, but first time around with these pups that we currently have, and for anybody else who's looking to get a little bit more insight on training. So ladies, thank you both again for hopping on. And Kat, do you mind just giving our listeners a recap of what the tracking portion is?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the NA test, there's the three phases like we talked about. There's the field portion and the water portion, then the tracking portion. And the tracking portion is what we're going to be talking about today in depth. And basically, the setup is to have a pheasant pulling flight feathers on one wing so that it can't fly away. And then you run that pheasant off without the dog seeing it. And you have either a wind at your back or a crosswind. So not a wind straight into the dog's face. And then the dog gets brought up to a feather pile that was pulled from the breast feathers of that pheasant and is encouraged to find that wounded simulated bird. So this is basically how to prep your dog for the test, but also it's very valuable for hunting dogs to be able to find a wounded bird. If you break a wing and the bird runs off, we want to conserve that game. So that is exactly how we prepared the dogs for the test, but also it applies to hunting as well.
I find it one of the most challenging aspects of the NA test. I know Melinda and I have joined some together. I've taken the test twice, got 2 different scores. Melinda has 2, and tracking has stumped us every single time. So as Melinda said, we are selfishly trying to learn more, and I am taking notes actively. So I am so ready for all of these details. I really want to set us up for success, and I'm excited to really learn more about some of your recommendations, your tips and tricks, because not only are you a judge, but you also participate as a competitor in the NAVHDA testing system.
Absolutely. So I always tell people that NAVHDA is the tracking portion is the most unpredictable part of the NA test because those pheasants can do anything to you on that certain day. The scenting conditions can be, super dry or not. You could be trying to track in the rain. Who knows what's happening that day? So it can make it very challenging, not only for the puppy and for the judges to set up, but also for the handler to know what to do.
Absolutely. Bethany, go ahead. You look like you have something.
No, that's okay. You got it.
I'm just having flashbacks over here.
Yeah. Yes.
Flashbacks. So, like she said, I've run 2 tracking, 2 different scores, actually definitely scratched on one. They looked different, so if you, let me run down one and maybe you can give me a little bit of feedback, for instance. Our first
So this is one thing that is super difficult is when people try to explain what happened.
Yeah.
And then I'm supposed to picture it and give any insight. So I'll do my best, but keep in mind, I wasn't there, didn't see it.
I think that I'm going to go ahead and retract because as a trainer, I would tell anyone, unless I see it, there's nothing I can do.
Listen, so let's flip it.
Yeah.
What does a successful track look like? What does a 4 rating look like for a track?
Well, you bring your puppy up to the feather pile. You make sure that you release them properly and they are focused and engaged. They acknowledge scent and stay on that track, whether that is nose to the ground, straight on that track to their bird, or maybe they don't find the bird, but they stay on that track all the way out, advancing and staying focused until the judges are like, we've seen enough. Or they may have their head up high and they may be crossing back and forth across that track. It doesn't necessarily have a specific style, again, that we're looking for on how they do the track, but it's not just willy-nilly running across the field without any acknowledgement of scent, and getting their nose to pull them out in a very focused direction that track went. And ultimately it would be awesome if they find the bird, but it's not necessary to get a 4.
So with that, I think some of the feedback that I think Melinda and I have both gotten, and probably a lot of other people, is that differentiation between that hunting or searching and then that actual tracking. And I think I've gotten various feedback between nose up, nose down, nose in the middle. I don't know. But I have seen where my dog has started off on a track, kind of gotten away, started searching, hunting, found the track again, advanced forward, and I've gotten crazy feedback. So what is your recommendation if you are training for this and you see your dog starting to hunt? How can you intervene in that process?
So you ask 4 different trainers how to train for the track, you're going to get 4 different answers. So keep that in mind. There's multiple ways to prep for the track. What we like to do is make the initial scent work and learning to use your nose for a track versus breaking out and searching very controlled. And I also want the dogs to be successful so that they go, oh, that's what I'm doing with my nose. Cool. Because if you set up your training practice exactly like a track at a test could be, there's very few times that, especially in the initial stages, your puppy is going to successfully find that pheasant and put the pieces together of, oh, I used my nose, I worked hard, I stayed focused. And why?
I
didn't get the reward. Yeah. I worked really hard, but nothing happened because that bird continued running off and they maybe didn't have the confidence to continue on that track. The scent got cold, things like that happen. So when we're preparing, we try and set it up very, very controlled. And we actually do drags to begin with. A lot of times I will do a duck drag in preparation because ducks are super stinky, like the stinkiest bird you've ever seen, and so dirty and disgusting. I don't know why we keep them. Just for tracking practice. No, just kidding. But I like to create this scent highway, basically, that a blind dog could follow. And we then drag that duck a very short distance with a crosswind. And then I bring my puppy up and I keep them on a long line. So if they try and break out and search, I have a 30-foot check cord attached to them. I'm like, nope, let's get back on track. And I talk to them a lot during that beginning stage of the game, keeping them focused. Hey, look. Find it, keeping them focused in my direction. I'll help them advance. I'll walk forward with them. But we always do a really short track to begin with or a short drag to begin with so that we put the pieces together quickly and there's success. And then you build off of that. You make the drags more difficult. So you drag with the wind at your back. You go longer distances. You put a hook in that track so that it isn't just a perfect straight line every time. And then once your dog gets good at that, then we switch to a pheasant and do a couple drags. And then you can move to the point where they're actually doing a situation like an actual track. I also like to set up my track somewhere where I know that the bird isn't going to get into really thick cover quickly and then get lost. I like to use really open prairie grasses where I can see where that bird is really well when we get to the point where they're actually running off for the track, so that I know I can still see where that bird is at and it's not, in the woods somewhere getting lost.
That's awesome. I think, trainer mind, again, set your dog up for success. Success is reinforcing, which is what makes them want to get out and do it again and put those puzzle pieces together. And I even think as I'm listening, as a trainer, but also a handler and a sport that's still pretty novel to me, I can see where I can take more isolated training moments instead of just, dragging that bird 50 yards, what's 5 yards? Start small, let them get success. I love that. You said you use ducks, so Bethany, put it on our shopping list. We need to find some dirty ducks. We'll have Ryan
If you
go back
can't,
out.
you can definitely just work with pheasants. Work with what you've got. But I like starting with those super stinky ducks because that they create a lot of scent.
I feel
that's
like
really hard not to follow.
I've also seen you use some liver drags. Is that something you recommend as well?
It's definitely something that you can do. It works. Basically, what we're trying to do in these beginning stages of drags to intro tracking is use of nose. I want this puppy to figure out how to use their nose to follow a track to find something. People will use hot dogs. They'll cut up pieces of hot dogs, drag hot dogs, and have hot dog bites along the way and at the end of the thing. I've not done the hot dog thing. But the liver thing, similar, there's a food reward at the end, basically. Lots of scent with those livers, and dogs a lot of times will learn to be tracking dogs too from blood trailing and stuff. So utilizing that in the intro stages to blood trailing for deer is something that we do. But basically you need to teach your puppy not to just search and, fortuitously find these birds out there, but to stay focused on scent that's there, that's hot. This is hot scent, guys. This is a duck or a pheasant that has just been drugged here or just been left here. Why would we leave that? We would not. We need them to understand and associate that hot scent means I'm right on that bird. And if I stay on it, I'm going to get it.
And it sounds like this setup is a little bit more contrived than an actual hunting scenario. It sounds like, when you go to track a bird in a hunting scenario, you're going to have a little bit of that blood trail. You're going to have that gunpowder scent because I'm guessing you've hit that bird somehow. So it sounds like there's a few other identifiers for it. Because I think that's something that tripped my dog up was, it's just bird scent, aren't I supposed to point these, so that's exactly what she did. She kind of more or less followed the air, stayed on scent, but then pointed her pheasant, and we ended up getting a 0 on that tracking.
So when we pull the flight feathers, because they're pulled on one wing, not cut, blood typically comes a little bit when you do that. So there is some blood potential and, the scent of the bird, but a lot of it is just inexperienced noses. These puppies are puppies. They're young. They haven't had as much experience and opportunities to put their nose to work and truly learn how to use it in certain scenarios and what their purpose is. I absolutely would love my dogs to go out and point that bird at the end of the track. They don't necessarily have to point it. They don't have to find it, like I was saying. They could just grab it and retrieve it, or they could grab it and run off with it. I mean, that is, kind of here nor there. If your puppy struggled with pointing birds in the field, and they didn't do maybe a great job in their field portion pointing, the judges are typically going to make note of that so that they can watch for the potential of a point on the track. And if the puppy points their pheasant at the end of the track, we're going to give that puppy credit for pointing, and then it's going to potentially increase and improve their overall pointing score. So pointing isn't a bad thing. So having that option when they get to the track is great to improve a score if needed. And like I said, puppies learn a lot from experiences. So taking them hunting after you've prepped for the NA test, they're going to be like, it all makes sense now. Now I know what I was working all summer for. But I think I mentioned, maybe it was in the last podcast, maybe it was in this podcast, I can't remember exactly, but the age of the dog, the maturity of the dog, their previous training and exposure can also, make a huge difference on how the puppies perform at these tests. Because let's say your puppy is 5 months old in November. They probably didn't run an NA test yet. Probably not. I've run a puppy at 5 months old. My husband's run a puppy at 4 months old. Typically, we run them older than that, but there's fewer tests usually available in November, December timeframe without doing a ton of traveling further south. So you got your puppy that's maybe 5 months old right when hunting season arrives. And you've said, well, I've at least done the few things that are required to take a dog hunting, which is a bird intro, a gunfire intro, and it's going to come back to you. And then they're going to just kind of get on the job training. They're going to figure things out as they go. And maybe you've had a few opportunities to do some, bird launcher courses, things like that. So they were like, I kind of figured out this pointing thing, but I really need to apply this in the real world. And then you take them hunting all season from November to January, and then their math. So we've got a 5-month-old in November, December, January, February. So you've got an 8-month-old, 9-month-old coming into potential spring NA testing season, but they've just hunted their butts off all year and they've tracked wounded birds in real life. They've pointed running wild birds, and you go take them to their NA test and they're like, got this in the bag. I know what I'm doing, because of all of that real on the job, real world experience. Now you take a puppy that was born in January and they are running their NA test in September, October. You've got the same aged puppy, but it hasn't had any real world experience, just the training that we, try and apply as much as we can make it like real world hunting, which we can't because we're using preserved birds and things like that. And they're like, well, I've had a lot of training opportunities and setup experiences, but nothing like a hunting dog has experienced. And they may struggle a little more with that tracking and with figuring out how to search the field with more purpose and things like that, just from plain old experience. So that is something that I always tell people to think about and take into consideration when, you're getting your puppy, you're training your puppy, and you're running your tests. So not just age, but what have they done? Some people have that opportunity to take a young dog hunting first and then NA testing after.
I will attest to that process, although I did it a little bit backwards. I think the NA test and the training prepared us for our put and take kind of pheasant hunts that we did when my dog was around 9 months old. And we found great success with that. Now, there was very much that learning curve in the beginning with that first hour out. I couldn't tell if she was mousing or finding pheasants, but then it started to click and it was amazing to see.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. See those little puzzle pieces all come together. And, my journey has been different because I, as more of a trainer handler, have not had the opportunity to get out on birds with my dogs quite yet in our journey, which I'm super excited for come fall. I'm actually trying to see if Kat will invite us out towards her way this fall. But I definitely understand that how, training scenarios are great, but it definitely, it's like knowledge, right? You also need the real world experience to apply said knowledge to really make a solid connection between what you're learning and how to apply these things to real life. So that makes absolute perfect sense. So you mentioned wind. Wind is something I also struggle with. When it comes to setting these tests up, are judges obviously taking these things in consideration when they, pick where they're going to run and how they send off the birds?
Yes. So we're looking at the wind. We are trying to set these tracks up at either a crosswind, like I said, or the wind at your back. You never want to set up a track where the wind's directly into the dog's faces. And then you also want, if you have that crosswind, which happens a lot where you have a crosswind in those situations, you want to make sure that you're setting up your tracks so that the last track doesn't necessarily blow across the next dog's track. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It sounds like you have to run a lot of birds in one area. Now, would you recommend just getting some real birds and really just, after we've gotten our dogs kind of putting their nose to the ground, slowing down their movements, should we be practicing with these birds before we hit an actual test?
Like doing actual tracks?
Yeah. Should we maybe go ahead and get some for our next test, we're actually going to be using Chucker for the tracking portion. So we should probably be running simulated scenarios.
They're going to be using Chucker for the tracking of the test?
I think pheasant is really hard to find out here in the Midwest right now.
And this is for a test?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I need to look at that because I didn't know that was something that could be done.
Yeah, this is for who are we participating with? Well, I won't
Four
say the
Rivers.
name, Justin. Okay, Bethany.
It's already on the
It's-
last podcast.
You're right. It's Four Rivers. We definitely got a policy rundown of how the test is going to go that way that day, and I believe they said there's some kind of supply issue with pheasants, so they're going to be using chucker instead.
It says chucker. Yep.
Okay.
I've just actually never been at a test that they've used chucker, so I just wanted to double check. But I mean, if they're running a test and they've gotten it approved by the NAVHDA International, then you probably are good to go.
Awesome.
But
Cool.
yes, so definitely preparing, and that's one thing. If you're only practiced on chucker and your test's going to be on pheasants, that's where it's like, hey, having some exposure to that bird and bird scent is great if you can do it before the test. And vice versa. So if you've only ever trained on quail and you're now having chucker, trying to have some exposure to that and ahead of time is good. Something that we've done a few times, I wouldn't say it's our most efficient or effective way of training tracks, is so you do all that prep work, like I said, like you're doing your drags with ducks, drags with pheasants, runoff pheasants, is then get enough pheasants and then go hunt them. So basically putting them out, not setting them real hard so they're going to be running, and take your dog out and let them hunt pheasants, because that's something that I would say fewer trainers have the ability to do, is to put out pheasants to train on, because first of all, they're harder to come by, like you mentioned, at times. They're also a lot more expensive than quail and chucker. So you think about getting enough of the birds out there for enough opportunities for the dogs to, interact with them, whether they're pointing them, tracking them. You're looking at, couple $100 worth of pheasants each time you do this, things like that. And it can be a deterrent. I tell people that you can't put a price tag on training, but also there's budgets and stuff. I get that. So I would say it's probably a way to do it, but it's a less efficient and maybe financially feasible way to do it. Basically, you're trying to set up a hunt for your dog, which is what we're trying to do with wild bird hunting our dogs, to prepare them.
Absolutely. So it sounds like it's a combination of setup scenarios and applying those scenarios. So I know I briefly mentioned it, but I have an English setter. I tested my Ryman type, which is more of a close fitting setter. The first year I tested within the system. This year I'm testing with my field setter, who he's meant to be followed on a horse for sure. So I worry about getting him to slow down. Do you have any tips on how I can? I know we mentioned hot dogs and drags. Can you kind of give us a rundown of that first few situations where I'm setting him up for success, what that could look like?
I would 100% have him on a check cord.
Absolutely.
So that if he tries to just balls to the walls, blow you off and hit the field hunting, you can say, no, you're attached to me and you need to come back, and keep him really focused, and then make that track short. So, not that he can visually see the pheasant or the duck or whatever you're going to be using, but definitely so that you keep him focused, even if you can keep him focused for a very short 10, 20 yard little track here, that he gets success, so that he's like, oh, I stayed really focused. Here was that. So then we can say, hey, now you're going to stay focused for just a little longer next time and get on this. I don't want to say I know your dog, but I know a lot of field trial bred dogs like to run straight lines. So
my dog.
So I would say also, when you get to the point of challenging him and he's ready for that, don't set your track in a straight line, and don't release him in that straight line that he's just a fortuitous find and he just got to it. You want to make sure that he's actually following his nose, and this is a good test of that, to put like a hook in your track. So he maybe is running, getting on that straight line, but he has to acknowledge that the scent has turned and he's taking that hook in the track, in the drag. Now, obviously, you're not going to pre-program your pheasant to run that way, but those drags you can do that with. And that's the hard part with the tracks themselves, not only prepping for them and running birds off, but the test. You don't know what that pheasant's going to do. It may take a really great straight line for 40 yards, and then the judges lose sight of it, and then it does this super big circle behind thing. they are unpredictable and they never cooperate. Like you see the judges out there doing these dances and clapping and trying to get the pheasants to run off, and they
You're
won't.
bringing me back hot flashes and memories.
Yes, because the pheasants don't always like get what we're trying to get them to do. So
Absolutely. They probably have a little bit of natural instinct to go against what us
well,
who have
typically we're like, hey, look, there's cover out there. Go to
Get
the cover. Just go to it.
No, it's a bird brain.
Yeah,
It's a bird
exactly.
brain. You mentioned cover just now. I feel like that's something that also matters with tracking, right? I think dogs have to break brush.
So there's not necessarily a thing where you're like, you have to transition into the thicker cover to get a prize one. But if your dog doesn't continue to expand their track and stay on that for a certain distance we're looking at and multiple acknowledgments, and if that track happens to break into thicker cover, that we are going to see that. But that's not like, oh, they tracked so well, but they just didn't get that last little bit because they wouldn't break over. That's not necessarily going to be like, no, you're not getting a pass on this. So it's not necessarily have to get into thicker cover. Usually there is some form of cover change because, again, we're trying to get the pheasants to naturally want to run away from us into someplace that seems safe. And
Sure.
that is typically thicker cover that they're like, hey, that's where I want to be.
Now, what should that ground that is tracking look like? Should it be tall grass? Should it be short grass?
You got to work with what the chapter has a lot of times. We don't want completely bare ground because that's not going to, hold any scent. So a plowed field isn't going to be a great option. But sometimes there is, wheat stubble that we're starting in, things like that we'll have to get across. But grasses, there is sometimes, and I haven't had the opportunity to judge in certain areas. So the cover changes so much in, the Northeast versus the Midwest versus the Western states. Like I know there's a bunch of sagebrush. I've not judged at a test in sagebrush. So I would be definitely having the judging team that I'm with giving me, some insights and things as well, which is why we have a judging team. And they're usually bringing in out of area judges as well as, local judges so that we get, perspectives from all across the US from different chapters, evaluating different cover and different dogs and things.
That's awesome. So where do you judge at? I would like to be wherever you are. You sound, these are things that we've never heard before. Again, Bethany and I have, had 4 runs so far between us and have had a hodgepodge of different feedback on these things. But yeah, can you let us know where you judge?
So when I was apprenticing, I was everywhere. Literally, I went everywhere, man. I went out to the Northeast, Texas, Minnesota, North Dakota. But after that, I actually apprenticed while I was pregnant with our first little boy, and then was 9 months pregnant, finishing my apprenticeship, and was like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do next year having a brand new baby. And so since then, I've cut way back on the tests. So I only usually do a couple spring tests and a couple fall tests because it's hard to be away from the babies for all weekend long. And that's usually when I get them because they're at, childcare during the week. So I am judging this year, I know, at Mo Uplands. I think the test is in April. I got to double check.
It is. I'm signed up for it.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll
keep
see
that
you
on my
there.
schedule now.
And then I believe I'm judging. I don't know. I've been asked to judge a lot of places, but I've had to say no because I have to kind of keep that. Midwest Tri-State usually invites me to their tests in South Dakota. And depending on the, weekends and they work out, I do help there. Heartland in the Brainerd, Nebraska area. I have friends that are part of that chapter. So they scratch my back, I scratch theirs in a sense that, if we ever say, hey, we need judges down in Kansas, they're like, okay, if you come judge for me, we'll come judge for you type of things. So those I judge at the local chapter sometimes in Kansas, but I have to be careful with that just in a sense, like I can't be judging dogs that we've trained or puppies from, our program and things like that, just from, maintaining a bias or not being biased. There we go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Well, I'm feeling good about getting out tracking training this week. It sounds like yeah, we'll start small. We'll start in a nice, calm, low distracting environment so the dog can stay in tune on that bird scent, and we'll keep moving. I think I'm number 2 on the wait list for Mo Upland. So I'm going to keep on that wait list, and hopefully, with the work we do over the next few months, we can get some free. I'm going to have to take a before video so you can see what I'm working with. So testing, be like, okay, you've improved. Or oh my gosh, you did not listen to me at all. But improvement's what I'm shooting for. So
I always tell people that, like I said, the track's the most unpredictable part of the test, and it's a crapshoot. I can have a dog I go to the test and I'm like, well, I'm not worried about tracking, and then they make a fool of me, right? So it's a glimpse of that puppy on, a specific day, and anything can happen. And so keep that in mind. Like I said, you're going to still go home with that dog at the end of the day, and they're going to do great for you the next time when you're not under judgment, because that's, how puppies and the dog world works. Yeah, they're not machines. They're not perfect all the time. So it would be boring if they were.
I love hearing that from another trainer. It's one of those constant reminders of, there really is no, 16 months obviously is the cutoff to participating with stuff like this, but your dog really has no cap on its training and when you have to complete that by. And I guess the message through all of this is set your dog up for success and work at their pace and let them find that reinforcement in it, because then they're going to be more likely to want to repeat these behaviors. I love it. I hear Shug barking in the background, so I'm going to get her out to potty here in a moment. But Kat, Bethany, I think we are ready to get some tracking in, some training in. And again, thank you so much for breaking that down for us. Before we sign off, can you remind our listeners where they can find you?
Yes, absolutely. So standingstone.com, we have a website as well as a supply store, standingstonesupply.com, where you can get all your dog training goodies. We have all of our social media platforms on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon, where we can actually help you with training from home, reviewing videos, things like that.
I love that. I'm going to send that video in through Patreon, and
there you go.
We'll see how we do.
I'll be like, watch these videos and do this next.
Don't sign up. That dog has no slowdown. up. No, I'm joking. Thank you, ladies. And again, everyone stay tuned for our episode next week, where we talk about the next portion of NAVHDA testing, which is the UT prep and moving into invitational. So stay tuned, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Next Generation Dog Podcast. Weekly episodes are released on Fridays on Spotify and YouTube. Please follow the Next Gen Dog Pod on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, and Facebook for even more content dedicated to all things dogs. Follow Urban Uplander Pet Care and Sanguine Moon Kennels on Instagram and Facebook.